Hello guys, it's JohnnyTime and welcome to another amazing Web3 security interview. Today we have a special guest, Jack Sanford, the founder behind Sherlock. Sherlock is a platform that everyone should know these days in the Web3 security space. We're going to discuss so many interesting topics. We're going to share tips for beginner Watsons that want to compete in auditing contests in Sherlock. We're going to see how Sherlock leverage competitive audits with a lead Watson to achieve maximum security for protocols. We're going to hear Jack's background and what he thinks about the future of the Web3 security industry, and also share some roadmaps and new features that are coming up to Sherlock. So it's going to be super interesting. We might leak some alpha. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello, Jack. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Johnny. Doing all right. Thank you. How are you doing?
Amazing. Thank you for coming. Now, before we talk about Sherlock, I'm more interested about your background, how you got into blockchain security and blockchain in general. We had a previous conversation before that you come from a finance background, and I think it will be very interesting for the listeners to hear like your whole story.
Yeah, definitely. So my journey is a pretty winding one. I started out actually trying to be a professional tennis player, and a lot of my friends that I grew up playing with are still playing in Wimbledon and the US Open and whatnot. I had some injuries, unfortunately, that kept me out of it. But I still ended up playing at a very high level in college, in university in the US. But I also focused a lot on, school and grades and other things that ended up being pretty important, which was good. And so that was kind of my entry into more of a finance interest. I had always had a really deep interest in finance. And so I went to the business school and university. I did investment banking afterwards, which is a very kind of intense career, especially at the lower levels. And then I worked at Citadel, basically a big hedge fund, trading bank stocks, essentially investing in bank stocks, going long, short, bank equities. And that gave me a super deep understanding of the traditional financial system, at least the US financial system, and just all the things that are wrong with it, all the things that are not ever going to change without massive deregulation or better laws. So, I kind of got tired of looking at the same regional bank stocks. I mean, it was literally like traveling to Texas, traveling to, these different parts of the US and meeting with kind of random bank CEOs of these public companies that were very large, but no one had ever really heard of. And so, got kind of tired of that and got more of an interest in programming. That was something that was becoming a lot more important, even at the hedge fund. And so I ended up deciding to leave the hedge fund, get into kind of the startup world, and just spent about 1.5 to 2 years self-teaching programming, building iPhone apps, building web apps, doing Python projects. And so, I wish I had seen your courses back then, because I eventually got into Solidity. There wasn't a whole lot, this was 2020, early 2020. And so there wasn't a whole lot of material out there, but I remember reading, what is that book, Mastering Ethereum. I think Crypto Zombies was around then, and I got into Ethernaut. The whole reason was just because I had this background in finance and I saw Ethereum, or at least DeFi, which was kind of taking off in 2020, as an actual viable way to improve a financial system, and we hadn't seen, at least I hadn't seen for 2 years, a viable way to improve it while I was working that job at Citadel. And so I got super, super interested in it. And I was like, man, this is unbelievable. If we could get one country to use this financial system, like that would be the craziest thing ever. So how can we make that happen? How can we do it? And I just started building. I started doing hackathons in the space. That's pretty much the entry point. And Sherlock was kind of, the natural course of just asking questions and saying, how can we make this a real financial system that actually works? What are the problems? Okay, scalability is a problem. Okay, transaction fees being too high, that's a problem. But there are some good teams working on that. There are some good efforts. The UX side with wallets was a problem, but I didn't think I was probably the right person to be building, consumer facing wallets, and there were some other good teams out there doing that. So eventually I kind of landed on, okay, well, we need to make sure these smart contracts are safe. At the end of the day, people are going to put their life savings into these smart contracts. So how can we make sure that you can be comfortable doing that? And so smart contract coverage, Nexus Mutual, Sherlock are kind of the bigger names in that industry, I guess, even though it's still pretty small today. That's really important. And then, we can get into how Sherlock eventually made its way into auditing and some of these other areas too.
That's a very interesting journey and like transformation from tennis to finance to tech to blockchain. Like you've been through a lot. It's very interesting. And so your first experience with crypto was technical experience, or you started as like investing or figuring out what is Bitcoin, what is Ethereum, and like ICOs era? Like when did you start like getting into crypto?
Yeah, again, early 2020. And I think I actually read the Ethereum white paper before the Bitcoin white paper, but those are the first two things I did. And then I read, Mastering Ethereum, and I happened to, have a really strong interest in programming at that time, and I still do today. But it was just very natural for me to want to understand, like, okay, what are these cryptographic guarantees? How do these different things work? I mean, the Ethereum white paper on its own can get into some pretty technical topics. And so I was just like, well, let me try to understand these and see. I basically wanted to know if it was legitimate or not. Like, is this kind of a scammy thing? Because I was around in 2017, I was paying attention. And so I just wanted to figure out, like, okay, crypto's kind of dead. Like early 2020, not a lot of exciting stuff was happening still yet. At least it hadn't really picked up. And so I was looking at it like, man, this space is totally dead. But if what they're talking about is real, like if these things technically like check out, then this is one of the most exciting things that's going to happen. So yeah, it started out technical just because that was kind of the way for me to understand, like, can I actually spend my time in this space, or is this, just sort of a fugazi?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you basically, but did you also invest in crypto, like, or you just look at it from the side and was interested about the tech and stuff?
Yeah, I invest a lot in crypto. I don't even know how much of my, life savings is in crypto, but it's an irresponsible amount for sure. And
irresponsible amount.
And it's
I can relate.
It's nothing. I don't go too deep into the altcoins and whatnot, because I just think, like, man, if this stuff takes off, I'm happy with whatever the positive outcome for like Bitcoin and Ethereum and those types of tokens are. Like, that's enough for me. I don't need to shoot for anything crazier and be wrong with some of those, alt tokens. And I don't have time. I don't really, want to day trade or make trades every month. So yeah, I just like having the exposure.
Definitely. I'm wondering if you had an experience of, like, if you tried to use DeFi before, like, starting with Sherlock, and you had an experiences of like protocols that got hacked or rug pulled, because I did.
Yeah, no, I was lucky, and I wasn't doing anything too crazy. Like, I was using Uniswap. I was using these things that were actually working. They were hard to figure out, and the UX was terrible, and, still is to some extent in terms of MetaMask and whatnot. But, and, not their fault, not MetaMask's fault. Uniswap has a great UI. But just, having to keep track of your seed phrase, having to have your address and copy paste your address and these different things that we take for granted after being in the space for so long as normal. They're not normal when you're getting into this space. So
they're not normal. Newcomers are struggling a lot with these things.
Yeah. We need to abstract some of those things away still, I think. And I know there's good efforts towards doing that. So I'm optimistic. But yeah, I was lucky to not.
I'm optimistic rollups.
Exactly.
Bad joke.
No, and I mean, abstracting it away, account abstraction is definitely a good way of doing that. So, we are actually talking about the things that optimistic rollups, account abstraction, like, these are the things that are going to define the next kind of couple years and make the UX better, make the transactions, what does Brian Armstrong say? 1 second, 1 cent, like less than 1 second, less than 1 cent. And account abstraction, hopefully you'll be able to do things without having to actually do them. And that'll make everything a lot easier for users.
For sure. And basically to get like mass adoption and scale, we need both improvement in UX and also, I believe, security. That's why we are here.
Exactly.
And everyone is doing their parts. You guys built Sherlock, which is an amazing platform. And I'm interested to hear like the story of like how Sherlock started. What is Sherlock all about? Because I know that in the beginning it was more of like insurance DApp or platform, and then you shifted a bit towards like also auditing contents and competitive audits. So yeah, first, like if you can explain what is Sherlock is all about, how it started, and like the story behind it.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, continuing where we kind of left off, 2020, I was just trying to learn a lot. I was learning Solidity. I was trying to learn about different ecosystems. I think I spent like 3 or 4 months, maybe 2 to 3 months building like some RFC technology for iPhones for a dash blockchain kind of project. And
yeah, only the old school people know what is Dash blockchain. I know.
Yeah,
it's like Dash and Monero and like Dash. It's like same like some kind of privacy blockchain, right? Dash, if I'm not wrong.
I don't actually remember if it was privacy or not. I just remember that I eventually figured out that there was just rampant corruption throughout the entire kind of governance structure of it, or at least that was my maybe it's changed since then. But it didn't seem like a lot of the grants and initiatives were really going to the right people in some ways. But what I really liked about it is that they were on the ground. Like they were on the ground in Venezuela, they were on the ground in Colombia, trying to actually get real usage. And so that's kind of what drew me to it. But anyways, I eventually figured out like, okay, there's some bad actors in this space, or at least, there are some things that I would be doing differently probably if it were my blockchain. And so, eventually got to Ethereum, and then eventually started doing, ETH global hackathons, that kind of thing. And Sherlock was something that, was kind of a rough idea in my head after reading a bunch of different things. I think I read the How to DeFi book and learned about different types of smart contract coverage plays, and just realized like, okay, there's probably a way to do this totally differently than it's been done right now, and do it in a way where it hopefully reaches kind of mass adoption and mass scale. And so, yeah, I mean, started out, I think it was January with a new hackathon, very quickly met my co-founder Avert in that hackathon. And, my intuition was like, okay, let's build the core team here. Like, let's get 5 people as the max you can get in a hackathon. I was like, all right, let's find 5 people. Let's get this thing going. Let's build it. And he was like, no, man. Like, I really like this idea. We need to keep this to 2 people. Like, you and I are going to build this in the hackathon. And I was like,
wow, I didn't know that Sherlock started as a hackathon idea.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Aave Market Make Hackathon or ETH Global Market Make Hackathon in early 2021. And so, yeah, we basically just built the MVP for it in that hackathon. Avert, my co-founder, he had been working in the blockchain space since like 2018, building smart contracts for projects like PiDAO and a few others that probably only, some OGs know. And yeah, so we got together. He built the smart contracts in the hackathon. I built the front end, in React. It was not the prettiest thing ever. But yeah, we came out of that. We got, some awards and whatnot. And, what did we do next? We went to Kernel. I would highly recommend Kernel to anybody who's thinking about starting a project or getting into crypto. That was the thing that really kicked it off for us, because we came out of the hackathon and there weren't like investors.
It's like accelerator or something?
Yeah. It's like, I think it's like an 8-week program where you just meet a bunch of people. They have different talks. Like, I've come and given some security talks now. It's a Gitcoin thing. So it's, shout out to Kernel and Gitcoin. Vivek runs it. He's awesome. Vivek Singh. And that was what really helped Sherlock kind of kick itself off. It was still, the market was definitely getting better. So I think we were, going into a good market, but that was where we met our early connections. That was where we met our lead investor, was through Kernel, and eventually did kind of like a demo day presentation at the end of it. And yeah, that was kind of the way that we were able to raise initial funding for Sherlock, flesh out a little bit more what the MVP was going to look like. And then over the next 6 months, we started building it. So that's kind of the origin story of Sherlock. And like I said before, the reason we wanted to build it was because people need to put their life savings into DeFi eventually, if that's the goal of DeFi. Obviously, there's different areas of crypto now that are also exciting. But in order to feel comfortable putting your money into DeFi, it's really difficult because there's not a single smart contract that is 100% provably safe. Even the Uniswap V1 contracts, like you can try your best, look at it a million times, but you can't prove to someone else that there's no bug in it. And that was kind of the aha moment for, okay, smart contract coverage is going to be important, because if you can never prove 100% safety, then you need to find someone else who can take that last risk. And ideally it's somebody who is, some kind of sophisticated institution who's doing it across 1,000 different applications on blockchains. And so when one goes bad and they have to pay out, for the hack, the other 999 are paying the premiums to make up for it, that kind of thing. So that seemed really, really important and like something that a mature DeFi ecosystem should have. I would say that's played out in some ways, not played out in others. It's been kind of a quieter couple of years in the smart contract coverage space. I'm still very bullish on it, still very excited about it. But the craziness of Terra, Luna, BlockFi, like all these things kind of made it so, okay, we're still a little bit earlier stage in terms of getting people into the right areas of DeFi and making it a more mature ecosystem. And so, that was Sherlock's initial idea was, okay, let's do smart contract coverage. And then as soon as we got our first clients for smart contract coverage, we also built our own protocol, and it was very complex. We made the classic kind of mistake of building a super complex V1 and then learning about, the real security stuff later on of, oh, wow, this is super hard to, ensure that it's safe. And so we actually quickly built a much simpler V2, but that's another story. We basically had some of the top audit firms audit the projects that we were trying to cover, audit our own protocol. And it was kind of like carnage in some ways, because we immediately paid out like a massive bug bounty after we had one of the best auditors in the space look at our code. Our initial clients were kind of all over the place with the quality of their audits and the experiences they were having. And so that was when it became really serious for us of like, oh, if we want to do smart contract coverage well at all, like if we want to have it be even viable, then we have to get this auditing thing right. Because this is the thing that's going to cause all of the exploits. Like if the audits aren't good and if the people doing the audits aren't good. So that was kind of the initial impetus to getting into auditing. And that was a whole nother journey, which, maybe we can talk about in a different question.
It's very interesting. Can you tell a bit, what does it mean, smart contract coverage, and how it works?
Yeah.
Like on the back end, behind the scenes, like what does it mean for users and for the people who cover it?
Yeah. So
the insurance.
Yep. So the smart contract coverage, somewhat, some would call it insurance. There's different regulatory meanings of different words. So we try to be careful about what we call things. But the basic idea is that, Sherlock is actually a B2B one. So let's say you are Uniswap and you build new smart contracts, and your users are going to be using those smart contracts and kind of LPing, putting their funds into it. The funds are going to sit there, and they're basically at risk when they're sitting there in those Uniswap smart contracts. And Uniswap might say, okay, we want to go out and buy $100 million coverage policy. So if we get hacked, this coverage policy will pay us $100 million, and we can use that $100 million to reimburse our users effectively. And for that privilege, Uniswap will pay like a monthly fee. I mean, everyone is kind of familiar with paying car insurance or paying, different
house
types of insurance in their daily lives, house insurance, travel insurance. It's a very similar thing where it's like, okay, you make a small payment semi-regularly, and then if the really bad thing happens, if the trigger happens, then a big payout comes in the other direction. Like a big payout comes to you. So that's the basic idea of smart contract coverage is, all right, we're going to pay these premiums and do that monthly or whatever. And if a hack happens on our smart contracts, which it's hard to ever 100% know that a hack isn't going to happen. If a hack happens on our smart contracts, then Sherlock or someone else is going to pay us back, a large sum of money so that whoever lost money in that hack can get reimbursed. That's kind of the basic idea. There's a whole on-chain implementation that Sherlock has that I can kind of go through.
Yeah, that was my next question. How do you enforce it on-chain, or maybe it's being handled off-chain?
Yeah, so no, it's 100% on-chain. The hardest part, which was a huge point of controversy for many years. Yep.
How do you know that the contract got hacked? Basically, you check his balance, his token balance and ETH balance, and see that basically it was decreased. What if just someone just removed liquidity? There should be some kind of like observation or like to see if like you cannot really automatically detect, or maybe you can. I don't know if it's a hack or not, right?
So this was a huge point of contention in the early years of Sherlock. A lot of investors didn't like Sherlock because there's like almost like a religious debate of, can you use code triggers to know if a smart contract got hacked or not? Like, is there a way to detect in code this smart contract got hacked? It wasn't something else. It wasn't a user withdrawing their deposit. It wasn't some, functionality that occurs every so often. And Sherlock actually took the side of, you cannot know in code that a hack occurred, like with 100% accuracy. And the reason for that is, as the smart contracts get complex enough, imagine some of these derivatives protocols, some of these different things, the triggers have to become more complex. And eventually the triggers essentially have to be so complex that they mimic a lot of the functionality of the protocol itself. Like, they have to know, okay, in this situation, this isn't a hack because this is just a liquidation, or this is this thing happening because this user, fell below this threshold. And so the triggers have to be so complex that they start to mirror the code of the protocol itself. And once you start doing that, then if there are bad assumptions or there are smart contract bugs in the protocol, then you're mirroring those into the trigger itself at a certain point. And so that's one of the reasons why we didn't think it was possible. Another one is just because, using code to detect bugs in code is just a really hard thing philosophically. Like, the code is not smart enough. Like, the code only knows what that code is doing. It doesn't know what it's supposed to do. Like, it has no ability to understand intention.
It's like static analysis. It will never cover everything. I mean, I don't know if it's not exactly like static analysis, but it's like similar. You cannot really write code that will 100% detect all the bugs. You still need like a human observation or something like fuzz testing, or
you can have different scenarios. You can have different pieces of coverage where you're like, okay, if this goes wrong this way, then we'll know. Or I guess it's really saying, if this test doesn't pass, then we'll know that something might be wrong. So that's a big part of it. And then there's this other side of doing it programmatically, which is, okay, you're going to have, this was a kind of an early one that I think a different protocol used. They're like, okay, you're going to have Compound, you're going to have CUSDC. Like, you put USDC into Compound, you get CUSDC. If your CUSDC goes below 95 cents, like if Oracle, I think they were using an Oracle at that point. I forgot if it was Chainlink or if it was Uniswap. But if the Oracle value of your CUSDC goes below 95 cents, then you get a payout. And that actually works. Like that is pretty, it makes a lot of sense. Anytime a hack happens that's bad enough, it's going to drop below 95 cents. Like, the value of CUSDC is going to drop below 95 cents. And so that works really well. The problem is, if you're having that trigger, then you're also saying every non-hack scenario that causes it to go below 95 cents, you're also paying for that. And in Compound, there are lots of non-hack scenarios like that can cause that are just economic things occurring. Like, somebody could, bad debt can accrue. These things that are normal in a lending protocol can actually, cause the value of your collateral to go below 95 cents. If the liquidations don't happen fast enough, then your collateral can easily go below 95 cents. And so then the insurance or the smart contract coverage that is paying for that 95-cent kind of trigger policy, you basically have to pay it all of your yield, because the only reason you're earning yield is because you're taking some kind of risk somewhere. And that 95-cent trigger is taking away all of the risk scenarios that could cause it to go below 95 cents. And so you're not really doing anything in that case, because that person is going to make zero yield. They have to pay you all of the yield, because you are taking on every risky scenario that could cause it to go below 95 cents instead of just the smart contract hack scenario. So anyways, that was a way too long answer about why trigger-based smart contract coverage is not super realistic. But I think a lot of the coverage protocols that were doing that back in the day, they're either not around now, or they've switched to the unfortunate necessary model that Sherlock also uses, which is human-based on-chain triggers. And so that's the UMA optimistic oracle. If you're familiar with that, that's what Sherlock uses. There's also Claros Court, which is a different implementation, which, we don't like as much as the UMA optimistic oracle, but I think they're trying to do good things there as well. And Sherlock has its own, it's called a claims committee that some top kind of security experts are on, and they can make a decision pretty quickly and have the right, context, hopefully, to understand the exploit. So it's human-based triggers, but it is fully on-chain, which is cool. So there's no off-chain component.
It's a very good trade-off or workaround, I believe. Yeah, it makes sense. Like that, this is like the solution that you had to come with, because it's not really possible to do it 100% on-chain automated. It doesn't seems like feasible, at least not these days. Maybe in the future. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, hopefully we figure out a different way.
So you mentioned like starting, shifting or working together also with auditing, and Sherlock is also one of the biggest, if not like the biggest. There are three kind of big companies, C4, Sherlock, and now CodeHawks, that are doing competitive audits and auditing contests. So before starting with the competitive audits idea, did you also try something else, or you just right away started with competitive audits?
Yeah, so Sherlock for about a year before getting into competitive audits, Sherlock was actually we were matching teams of smart contract auditors together and kind of saying, okay, let's try to find, we were working with Chris Michel, we were working with Gerard Persson, some of these guys, and kind of putting them together and having them do audits in that model. And obviously there are some auditors who still use that model in terms of matching, some top auditors and then having them do an audit. So we used that method for about 10 months, almost a year, and it worked well, and we liked it. But we did notice that there was still some things that seemed to be slipping through the cracks. And there was, logically it was like, okay, we still are only having, maybe one or two top people look at this, maybe a couple, less top people look at it. And there's just so much surface area that we still didn't feel comfortable with it. We still were kind of like, okay, we're not fully solving the problem of trying to make sure that every possible vulnerability is found before mainnet. And so that's why Sherlock started getting more interested in the contest approach. Obviously, C4 was doing it a long time before Sherlock. And I think Sherlock's protocol, I'm trying to think if it was our V1 or V2, definitely our V2 was audited by Code Arena. So we had the contests, and we were one of the earlier protocols using Code Arena. And so we experienced all of the early problems, some of which potentially still exist today, where, I think we really wanted like Chris Michel to participate in our audit way back in the day and participate on Code Arena. And it just so happened that, we ended up scheduling it for a week where he was like at a wedding or something and out of town. And we're like, dang, we missed the guy. Like we really wanted to look at our code. We don't really know who looked at it anymore. I mean, back in the day, there was only, a dozen or 24 people looking at your contracts. Maybe it was a little bit more than that when Sherlock was doing it, but it wasn't much more. And so we were like, man, we missed the guy. Like, how do we know that we're actually getting a good review? Who do we know actually reviewed this thing fully? And then we also had the problem of like, okay, there were, 30 people or 40 people who participated in this contest. They submitted like, 250 things or something, which was a ton back then. And Avert, my co-founder, the solidity guru on Sherlock's team, spent like an entire week, like 12 hours a day for a week, trying to figure out if those submissions were real or not, and trying to do the POC for them and trying to understand, which ones were real and which ones weren't quite understanding the code base properly. And so, but we saw like, okay, there's a lot of submissions in here that we probably wouldn't have gotten if this was a 2-person audit or a 3-person audit. And that was really powerful. But it was unfortunate that Avert had to lose a week and basically validate everything himself to understand if it was real. So that was kind of like us understanding.
There was no judges back then in C4?
No.
Or it was like a mutual work of like the judge and the sponsor?
I don't believe there must have been a judge, because they still have to grade these submissions. So that they know who to give but it was, it might've been a bad time, but it took literally, I think 4 months. Like I think we did a January contest and the results came out in April or May. And so obviously, we weren't going to wait that long. So we had to go through all of the submissions in the very first week. Yeah.
So basically Sherlock is different from Code Arena because, as you say, it's like it brings the best of both worlds. It's some kind of like private audits where you can book your lead senior Watson, and you get also a lot of eyes to look because you have also the competitive part. So can you explain like how it's different from C4 or Codocs or any other auditing competition platforms? What differentiates and makes Sherlock unique?
Yeah. So in terms of, huge credit to Code Arena, huge credit to Zach Cole, Scott Lewis for coming up with the contest mechanism and making it viable. Obviously, Sherlock was inspired by that in a huge way. And like I said, there were just some things we were looking at it, and Sherlock never really wanted to get into auditing ourselves. And so, we were always looking at like, okay, is there a way that we can work with traditional auditors? Is there a way that we could, have different setups so that the coverage protocol would work well? Basically, like the premiums would be low. The hacks are low, the premiums are low. It works really well. Everybody's happy. And so we were trying to figure out always, okay, what is the best auditing approach to use? Should we partner with top audit firms and like reserve their slots ahead of time? We tried that for a little bit. Should we, eventually it became, okay, should we use Code Arena, since we believe that model has a really powerful piece to it in terms of the contest approach and getting 100 people to look at your code base. And it was a close call for us, but we eventually decided like, man, there are so many, we're not fully comfortable with the Code Arena, setup, just for those reasons that we talked about, where the protocol team has to go through the issues themselves. There wasn't a fixed review or anything really after the contest ended. And you couldn't guarantee that top people would look at your code base, especially when there were multiple audits running at the same time, multiple contests running at the same time. There started to be this question of like, okay, well, who is really spending the 50 hours that week to go through the code base in detail? Like, is anybody doing it? And so, for those reasons and some others, Sherlock decided to, okay, we have to build our own kind of approach to this, because it is significantly different from what we would want to see in Code Arena. And so, a lot of the differences are exactly coming from those problems. That's why Sherlock has the lead senior Watson. That thing is a whole, our leaderboard is completely different because of it. We have this thing where it's more like ELO style competitive rankings instead of like you just accrue points over time kind of thing. And that was because we knew we wanted to have lead senior Watsons. And then we knew, okay, we need to make sure that these guys are incentivized to try hard in every single contest, essentially. And if it's a guy who has accrued 2,500 points and everyone else is down below 1,000 points, then they don't have to try hard. So we had to create a system where it was like, all right, you have your last 70 contest days, and every time you do a new contest, that contest goes into your last 70 and it kicks out, a number of days or contests on the other side. And that way, maybe you can get away with, doing 1 4-week contest poorly, but that's 28 out of your 70 days. And so that's going to be a pretty large weighting, and your ranking is going to drop pretty precipitously if you do poorly in that one. So the entire Sherlock leaderboard and model is really set up to make sure that the lead senior Watson, it's great to make him show up. Like that's step one is, okay, let's make sure that this person is showing up. That's like a normal audit, right? You make sure the guy is showing up. But then let's go a step further and make sure their incentives are super strongly in the direction of trying their hardest in that audit and finding, okay, you found 5 criticals. Well, you better go look for the 6th one because there's 2 days left in the contest and someone else might do that. So that was, a big piece of the difference. And then there was a bunch of things. We obviously only focused on highs and mediums. That was another thing that Sherlock thought was really important because we were doing smart contract coverage. We don't pay out when there's a low vulnerability. The protocol team doesn't care when there's a low vulnerability and the protocol is already live on mainnet. Sorry, the team doesn't care when there's a low vulnerability and the protocol is live on mainnet because it doesn't cause any problem for their users. It doesn't cause any loss of funds. So doing the high mediums was really important. Having a fixed review at the end was really important. That's something you can only do if you have the lead senior Watson. You have someone who just spent all their time getting up to speed on the code base, understanding the vulnerabilities, having a system where we give a protocol team a curated list of vulnerabilities is really important because if you give them, we've had some contests recently where there's 1,000 vulnerabilities submitted and a protocol team is going to get, DOS, denial of service attacked, essentially, if you give them 1,000 vulnerabilities. And so we have to curate the vulnerabilities for them, deduplicate them, obviously, and filter out the invalid ones so that they get a list that's manageable that they can go through. And, maybe there's some false positives on there, but we better make sure there aren't any false negatives because a false negative means that there's a critical vulnerability that the protocol team isn't aware of and someone else is aware of it. So yeah, anyways, that's some of the differences between Sherlock and other models.
Yeah, it seems like it's very interesting differences. The main one is like the lead senior Watson. And with like this exact difference, the lead senior Watson, does it bring any bottlenecks or challenges like that, because like C4, for example, doesn't have lead senior Watson. And there were also a lot of talks about the fact that the lead senior Watson is the one who's like gets like the most of money of the audit contest, which is, it makes sense. We will also talk about like how to incentivize them to really deliver in this audit, like you said, with the point system and the leaderboard, the way the leaderboard works. It's very interesting. But what kind of bottlenecks and challenges this approach brings? Because yeah, it's something that was missing in C4, and for your needs, for the coverage needs, it seems like it works best, but I'm sure it has like some kind of like also disadvantages.
Yeah, there's definitely disadvantages to it. I think, operationally, one of the bottlenecks is that you have to secure a top lead senior Watson before you can really make sure the audit occurs. Like we can schedule an audit and it just so happens there's no senior Watsons available that week. We can't run the audit and we have to figure out something else. And so that creates a lot more operational overhead before the audit contest starts because you can't just start audits whenever you want. You have to make sure that you go out, figure out who's going to lead it, reserve them for the right amount of time and, lock everybody in so that a lead senior Watson is leading every single audit. So that's one of the, first bottlenecks. And then one of the other disadvantages is that they require fixed pay to show up to the contest. Like you can't have one of the top guys and ask them nicely and say, hey, please show up to my contest. That doesn't always work. And so you have to pay them a certain amount to show up. And if you're paying them a certain amount to show up, well, that money's got to come from somewhere. And, it ends up coming from the contest pot because that's money that would otherwise be going to security experts, other Watsons. And in order to make sure that this top Watson shows up, okay, we have to pay them some money. And now the contest pot is a little bit smaller because of that. And I think that's a major kind of disadvantage or unfortunate thing. But the cool part about that is, let's say the going rate for a top lead senior Watson is $20,000, a week. And that's kind of like, all right, $20,000 a week, they'll show up, they'll do the audit for as many weeks, as you're paying them $20K a week. Sherlock can have the fixed pay be, half that. It can be $10,000 or it can be $12,500 and they will still show up which is really great. So you're almost getting like a discount. You're getting a deal on the senior Watson because you would have had to pay $20,000 a week to have them show up, in a different model or in a traditional audit. And now they're showing up in Sherlock for $10,000 or $12,500. And obviously the reason.
And what incentivizes them to show them? What incentivizes them to show up, even though they can charge $20K per week?
Exactly. And the reason they still show up with that kind of lower amount is because they earn whatever they earn out of the contest pot. So they compete just like a normal competitor would in a normal audit contest, and they're able to keep whatever they earn. So if they perform well, they think, hey, I'm actually going to do well in this audit, then they might earn $25,000 or $27,000 a week or $22,000 a week instead of $20,000 a week. Obviously, if they don't perform well, they'll end up earning less. They'll end up earning $16,000 a week instead of $20,000 a week. But that piece is really cool because it allows you to get top people in and reserve them for cheaper, and then still have a full audit contest pot. And both a normal Watson and a senior Watson see that audit contest pot and they think, okay, I'm going to get a significant chunk of that if I perform well, which is true. And so it has a really nice, almost like discount. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the traditional auditors, you get the audit contest, and it also aligns everybody's incentives a lot more. Because if you just pay a lead senior Watson $20,000 to show up, well, all they have to do is show up. If you pay them $12,500 to show up and a variable amount to perform well, then they're highly incentivized to perform well for not only the monetary side of it, which is what we're talking about now, but the ranking side of
also
it,
the
which
points
we talked about earlier. Yeah.
This is very interesting. It's like you came up with a perfect model to incentivize all the parts and at the same time make it, affordable, and also provide the best value to the client, to the lead Watson, and also to the other contesters that one day want to become lead Watsons. So can you explain how can you become lead Watson? How can any Watson start and become a lead Watson?
Yeah, definitely.
What does it take? Yeah.
So what it takes is probably 95% listening to you and learning the actual intricacies of smart contract security and being very good at that. So, 95% on you. And then the 5% that I can add is that it's actually a lot easier if you have the skills and you have the background and maybe you've been competing for a while or you've been learning in different areas. It's actually really easy to become a senior Watson from a threshold perspective. You just have to participate in 4 weeks worth of audits on Sherlock. So once you hit, it's a 28-day mark. Once you hit 28 days, your ranking becomes officially live. And if your ranking is in that top kind of echelon, then congratulations, you're a senior Watson. And you spent 4 weeks, that could be 2 audits, two-person or 2-week audits. And that's all it takes to become a senior Watson. Obviously, the hard part is what you teach people to do, which is get good at smart contract security. Yeah, to perform.
This is cool. So anyone literally can become a senior Watson. It just takes 28 days. And there is also the point system, right? So a Watson can choose when he competes in a contest whether to go only for the money, for the USDC, or also to the points. Can you explain how the points play in this a way of becoming senior Watson?
Yeah. So the points are really important. And, I say it's like an ELO ranking in chess or in a video game, but it's not quite like that. And I guess, how do I start explaining it? Every contest that occurs, everyone brings their points with them. So let's say you have 100 points, I have 200 points. Or let's say you have 200, I have 100. And we bring our points together. And so that contest now has 300 points available in it. And basically, that means you brought 200 in, I brought 100 in, you're expected to earn 67% of the pot is what that means. I'm expected to earn 33%. If you outperform and you earn, 87% of the pot, or I'm trying to make the math work here, I'm not sure it's that easy, but let's say you earn somewhere in that ballpark, 85%, 87%, you're going to come away from that contest with 250 points
with more
instead
points.
of 200. I'm going to come away with 50 instead of 100. And it basically just averages that in. So if that was a 2-week contest, then you get 14 days worth of 250 points in your ranking. And maybe you had a different contest that was 14 days and you earned, 350 points. That means 14, 250, 350. Your average points that's actually going to show up on the leaderboard is 300. So basically every time a contest occurs, everyone bets all of their points essentially by competing. And depending on how much of the pot you take, which you could think of in dollar terms, or you can think of it in kind of like points terms on the back end, depending on how much of that pot you take, that's how much will contribute to your ranking, will average in to your ranking, I guess. And to answer your other question around choosing to compete for points, we thought it was really important to allow people to opt out of the points competition whenever they want to. And that kind of goes back to the, Chris Michelle wedding scenario or whatever it was, where he was only able to spend like 3 days in our contest instead of 7 days or 10 days. We don't want to disincentivize him from spending those 3 days. So if you can show up and you can only spend 3 days out of 10, it's probably not going to be good for your ranking if you compete for points, because other people are spending 10, you're spending 3 days. So we thought it was really important to make sure
you might lose your senior Watson. You might lose your lead Watson if you lose all these points. If you basically your points are decreased, you will lose your ranking and you cannot become a lead senior Watson. We also know that you did some change where if you have more points, you're like lead senior Watson that I paid more, right? And if you have less points, you have your lead senior Watson that this is something that we'll also discuss later. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's just to make sure that we want people to compete even when they can only do a partial competition, because in those 3 days, maybe they find a critical bug that no one else finds. And then that's going to be super impactful. And that's kind of like one of the biggest goals of the audit contest, at least in Sherlock's view, is how do we make sure we maximize the amount of vulnerabilities that could possibly be found in this contest? And that means, okay, if you can only spend 2 days, we got to make it really worthwhile for you to spend those 2 days. Okay, if you're a random person that we've never heard about before, like HE1M in the optimism contest we ran earlier this year, we need to make sure it makes sense for you to compete in that contest, and we don't force you to jump through a bunch of hoops before you can compete, because that person is going to show up once in a blue moon. We know they're going to find, I think HE1M got paid $125,000 for finding one critical vulnerability in the optimism code base. And we need to make sure that we are incentivizing that person to join and maximizing their chances of joining.
Super cool. And it's very important actually for all the listeners that want to become lead senior Watsons and enjoy the fixed pay. You really need to think through before you choose USDC or USDC plus points, because I talked with Rog. I mean, he has different nicknames. That's the story, because he has a different nicknames in Code Arena, HollaDieWaldfee, and in Sherlock he's like Roguereddwarf, because he had to recreate a new account, a new wallet, and compete again because he screwed up in the beginning because he didn't know the system of like points and USDC, and then his rankings got like not very good. So we created a new profile and started doing the audits from there, compete with points, when he was aware for the points, and now he's like lead senior Watson, which is interesting.
That's really interesting. I didn't know it was because he messed up originally on his main account. That's interesting. And yeah, I mean, I think that happens.
I hope it's not a secret, because he told me in a personal, like off record. So maybe I will ask him if it's okay to post it. If not, I will cut it out.
Yeah, no, it was funny when he came out on Twitter and was like, "Hey guys, I'm Roguereddwarf," and we didn't know. I had no idea who Roguereddwarf was. I was like, "Wow, this is a random guy. I wonder if he used like a name generator for this name." But he seems to be really good at security.
Yeah, he is very good, very talented young boy. He's very young, like a lot of other auditors in the space that are killing it, and it's very cool.
Yeah,
and
super cool.
Yeah, so lead senior Watson basically earns a fixed pay, plus he gets a share from the pot if he gets finding, and he's also incentivized. So if he underperforms, by the way, lead senior Watson cannot choose not compete for points in an audit that they are lead senior Watson, right? This is how you keep their skin in the game and make sure they just don't show up for the fixed pay, right?
Exactly.
Which makes sense.
If you're getting paid $10,000 a week to show up, you are expected to compete for points because you're expected to give your full effort and your full attention to that contest.
And the lead senior Watson also, they're being ranked among them, right? And they don't get the same pay. So how does it work? This is some kind of recent update that you pushed because you get some feedback from the community that lead senior Watsons are getting paid too much, and it decreases the amount of the other pot for the other contesters. So how did you change it?
Yeah, and I think, the reason for making that change was that we think all the lead senior Watsons are super, super talented, and they are, some of the top security experts in the entire crypto space. But even between them, there's, slight skill differences, and there's also opportunity cost differences. So if you're the number 1 ranked lead senior Watson, you're just getting different opportunities than the number 9 ranked senior Watson or something like that. And so we really needed to figure out, okay, how do we make sure we can still incentivize the very, very best to show up to Sherlock contests and to lead those contests. And so, some of the more controversial things Sherlock has done in the past is experiment with super wide ranges of lead senior Watson pay all the way up to, 22,500 per contest. And I think, some of those got a little bit out of hand in terms of paying too much to the lead senior Watson, and Sherlock faced some criticism for that. And I think it was correct criticism in a lot of senses. And we've since changed it significantly, from that setup. But it actually was effective though, because there were certain senior Watsons who had kind of, moved away from Sherlock or weren't being as active on Sherlock. I think, WatchPug was the main example there, where they had been doing a few other things, and then the lead pay significantly increased, and they immediately came back to Sherlock and were trying to lead, every single contest they could, which is great from a protocol team's perspective if you're getting the number one ranked guy every time. But yeah, so we've since kind of said, okay, well, let's make the pay a little bit more reasonable. And if WatchPug doesn't show up every week, that's all right, because the number 2 guy, the number 3 guy, 0x52, I think, is ranked number 8, and he is an absolute monster, as I'm sure you're aware. So there's a lot of really, really great senior Watsons in Sherlock, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the number 1 ranked guy getting paid a super exorbitant amount to show up every week because of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you guys choose which senior Watson will lead an audit? Is the protocol is choosing it, or is something that Sherlock is choosing?
Yeah, so if the protocol team feels strongly about it, then they can have any senior Watson lead. They cannot have any Watson lead, because at a certain point, we think that's dangerous. But any senior Watson is someone that Sherlock has basically deemed credible, talented, skilled enough to lead a Sherlock contest. And so the protocol team is able to pick whoever they want. And that can come in handy when the protocol team has worked with someone in the past, or they've seen, okay, this person has just audited our competitor's code base, which is, if they're in a crazy part of they're building smart contracts that are very unique to a certain niche. Maybe they want an auditor who has experienced that niche before and has found bugs in that niche. So we allow the protocol team to choose the lead senior Watson if they so desire. But in a lot of cases, the protocol teams, they're not as up to speed on the rankings of security experts as we are, and the top security experts as maybe you and I are. So they don't have an opinion. And then at that point, Sherlock kind of reaches out to the top senior Watsons and just gives the contest to the top ranked person who commits to it. So, if it's the number 1 ranked guy who's there and ready to take on that contest that week, then the number 1 ranked guy gets it. Otherwise, it falls to the number 2 ranked guy, et cetera, et cetera.
That makes sense. Now, the protocols that are being audited in Sherlock through contests, they're also getting coverage. So does it work together or not always?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the coverage side of things, smart contract coverage, it's a little bit niche still, which is unfortunate compared to audits. And I think audits were, they were really not forced, but they became something that was deemed necessary by investors and users in the space kind of after 2017, the ICO boom in 2017, and all these unaudited projects were getting hacked. And so audits have become this like higher level thing that is sort of deemed necessary for a serious project. Smart contract coverage.
It's like a taboo, and all the other things are like, not very respected, like IR, monitoring, coverage, bug bounties.
Exactly.
But auditing is like a taboo.
Exactly. I'm trying to think of the right word or the right metaphor for it, but it's, it's in its own league in terms of it is required. It's one of the few security things that is basically required for a serious project to get serious investors or to get serious users. And so smart contract coverage isn't quite there yet. And that's why, and it's, it has a cost every month. So we don't want to force protocol teams to take on smart contract coverage if they don't want to, because we understand it's still growing and it's still a little bit more niche, or at least less required than audits are in the space. And so Sherlock puts our skin in the game for every single audit. And we say, okay, you're doing an audit with Sherlock. If you get through, the fixed review and you fix all the issues and everything kind of checks out eventually, then we will offer you smart contract coverage. Like Sherlock will offer you smart contract coverage. And you can choose to accept it or not. And that way, Sherlock is on the hook for every single audit we do, because we don't know if you're going to activate smart contract coverage or not at the end of it. And that means we have to treat every single audit as game day, and one that could end up paying out, a certain amount from Sherlock's coverage pool. And that forces us to focus really hard to give the best experience for every single audit that goes through Sherlock. And at the end of the day, protocol teams do not need to take on the coverage if they don't want to. And some of them are able to if they do want to. So yeah, that's kind of the way it's set up right now.
That's very interesting. And how are you able to afford it? So it's like when they choose to trigger the coverage on, they still need to pay for the coverage like monthly, or is like sponsored by Sherlock?
Yep. So they
have a discount or something.
Yeah. So if they want, $1 million coverage policy, it costs, I believe, around $3,400 a month for that right now. So basically it's saying if you get hacked, if your smart contracts get hacked, and it's a hack that Sherlock should have caught in the audit, then Sherlock will pay out $1 million. The protocol, which is basically LPs and investors in the protocol on chain, the LP pool will pay out $1 million. But until then, the protocol has to pay $3,400 a month for the privilege, I guess, of getting that $1 million payout someday if they get hacked.
That's interesting. And so how are you actually able to pay those kind of amounts if something happens? And we know that it happened. We'll talk about it in a second, about the interesting story behind Anja protocol. But like, so you mentioned like LP. So how does it work? How can you afford like $1 million pay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, Sherlock has an on-chain protocol. We have, an app, UI, everything. So we're kind of protocol builders at the same time as we're auditors. And one of the main functions of this protocol is that an LP or a, whale or whoever it is can stake their money into the protocol and take on the risk of these hacks. And in return, that $3,400 a month that we were just talking about that a protocol has to pay, it goes to the LPs. And so they earn, I think it's like a 17%, 18% USDC APY. There's also Sure tokens involved there. So they earn this, hopefully attractive APY in order to, and in order to get that APY, they take on the risk that, okay, if one of these protocols like Anja has a bug bounty payout where Sherlock paid $50,000, that comes out of the LP pool essentially. And so that would hurt their APY. I think it was, a loss of about 1 month's worth of APY. So they lost about 2 to 3% on their APY due to that Ajna bug bounty payout that Sherlock paid.
It's super cool, but I cannot choose, like when I stake in Sherlock USDC, now I get like 22% APY, but I cannot choose which protocols I want to be part of. It's basically in all of the protocols, right? So if one of the protocols is getting hacked, I'm being diluted.
Yes, exactly. Right. So everybody, It's sort of the same. We think of it as similar to, maybe a hedge fund. I mean, I come from the hedge fund world, and if you are giving your money to a hedge fund, you don't get to choose which stocks you get exposure to. The hedge fund decides, and because they're, doing whatever strategies, risk management things, and it doesn't make sense for you to pick and choose different stocks out of the hedge fund's portfolio and say, I just want exposure to these. And in the same way, Sherlock thinks that, okay, Sherlock is the one who is going and doing all this deep sort of due diligence, doing the full audit, doing the fix review, getting the protocol through that process and getting them to coverage. Sherlock is really the one that has the expertise in terms of which protocols should be safe and which shouldn't. That's the idea, at least. And so for that reason, the LPing only allows you exposure to the full pool. And part of the reason is because a lot of users, they're not as deep in smart contract security to really know what they should have exposure to anyways. So they don't want to have to, basically do like grocery shopping and pick, do your own research and pick every single project that they want to cover or not cover. It's much easier if they outsource that to Sherlock, who hopefully does a good job of it. And then they just get exposure to whatever Sherlock kind of puts in there.
Now, I see that there were also 3 claims, the Euler hack, Sentiment, and Anja Finance or Anja. But Euler, I think most of the money was paid back for the protocol eventually, right? So did you get the money back out of this this claim?
Yeah. So the Euler hack is
Euler.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly, but I think
Euler. I think you're right.
Yeah. So that one is a very interesting case. I mean, that one took by far the most amount out of that coverage pool. And it was a hack where, we really thought that Sherlock had done a good job of securing that protocol. And, it was WatchPug who was reviewing, I guess, that code that ended up having the vulnerability in it. And again, we still think WatchPug is one of the top security expert teams in the entire space, and they're still ranked very highly in every contest platform they compete on and that kind of thing. So really unfortunate circumstance. And it was back before Sherlock was doing audit contests. So it was more of that older model that we kind of decided, okay, there's a better way to do things. But it didn't come back and result in an exploit until about 10 months later, I think, 9 months later. So really unfortunate there, really unfortunate situation all around, especially for the Sherlock LPs. And unfortunately, there are still some ongoing situations where I'm actually not able to fully talk about that situation to the fullest extent that I would like to. But I can say that Sherlock has not received. Euler users have been reimbursed because the hacker did return the money, but Sherlock has not been reimbursed up till this point.
That's unfortunate. I hope it will be resolved and Sherlock will get the money back, because eventually it's not money that belongs to Sherlock, but all to the users. So it's like reimbursing the Euler users. The Sherlock users also needs to be reimbursed. But yeah, I hope that it will be resolved in the future. And you also cover, apart from hacks, bug bounty pays, right? So if a protocol got audited in Sherlock and then he goes to Immunify, for instance, and there is a bug, so Sherlock covers this bug. It's part of the policy, the coverage, or it's like some kind of additional service they need to pay for?
Yeah, so it's part of the coverage. We're thinking of different ways to set up the coverage, especially now that it's a little bit more of a bear market and the TVLs are down. But right now, the coverage is TVL coverage. So you get, $1 million worth of coverage and you get a bug bounty included in that. And Sherlock includes that bug bounty in the price. So you pay $3,400, you have bug bounty coverage as well on that $1 million. And the reason Sherlock does that is because it is much better to pay out a bug bounty of a smaller amount. So it's $100K bug bounty instead of $1 million exploits, 10% of the coverage amount, is what Sherlock is able to pay. Sherlock and Sherlock LPs would much rather pay for a bug bounty payout of $100K rather than pay out, $1 million exploit. And so that's the main reason that the bug bounty coverage is included in the exploit coverage, because it's meant to be sort of a first filter. Hopefully the white hats get to it first and we can resolve it that way and pay out, a fair amount to the white hat. And then if that filter gets passed, then the black hats, can exploit it on mainnet, which is the situation that everybody wants to avoid.
Which leads me to the next question about the Anja protocol. So it was a protocol that was audited 6 times in Sherlock, and it also had a bug bounty program.
Six
and
times.
There was a claim from 26.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead with the go ahead with the intro.
Yeah. No, you know what? Just you explain the story of Anja instead of like me. You know the details better.
I was sorry. I was just saying that Anja was audited 6 times in total, 2 times by Sherlock. And it is a really interesting case. So I'll go into the full thing, but Anja is a really cool protocol. It is kind of the first fully permissionless lending protocol. So I'm sure you're familiar with Aave and Compound and these other lending protocols, and they're great, but they require a lot of governance. And so that's why the Aave DAO, the Compound DAO, we've had all these different kind of situations and machinations in those different DAOs to set the liquidation threshold. I'm trying to think what the proper name is for it, but basically like you will, if you put in USDC, that's valued a lot more highly than if you put in like Shiba Inu into Aave, and your Shiba Inu will get liquidated when it drops in price a lot quicker, or maybe that's not right. Basically, your USDC is worth a lot more. You can borrow a lot more against your USDC than you can borrow against an altcoin.
So your loan to value, so it's basically loan to value, right? So your loan to value can be higher if you use like a more battle tested token like USDC rather than a meme coin.
Exactly. And setting those loan to value ratios is a super important and difficult piece that the Aave and Compound DAOs have to deal with all the time. They work with even external firms like Gauntlet to try to price those things properly and set the loan to values so that they're not so low that people can't get enough borrowed, but not so high that the liquidation risk, if a token drops, if Shiba Inu drops 50%, then you can't liquidate it at the price you need to. You liquidate it way lower, and that creates a massive amount of bad debt in those lending protocols, which is, really bad for every depositor. So anyways, Anja is a permissionless version of that. So there is no need to have governance set different parameters. Right. No need for governance. So it's really cool. It's also very complex, and that's why they have taken a very robust approach to security. Let me go through their auditing approach this year. They started, I believe, in January with a Sherlock audit contest. Then they did a Trail of Bits audit. Then they did a QuantStamp audit. Then they did a Prototech Labs audit. Then they did a Code Arena audit. And then they did a Sherlock
for the same
code base. There were a couple pieces left out of, I believe, Prototech Labs and QuantStamp. But for the same general code base, 6 audits over the course of 8 months or so, culminating in a final 6th Sherlock audit. And then they went to mainnet after they had done that whole process. And then within a month of being on mainnet, there was I would call it it was more of a high, not a critical, or, it was borderline critical, but it was something that was scary enough that Anja said, okay, this is something that we don't want the protocol to exist forever with, because it's permissionless. You basically deploy the Anja contracts and they're there forever. Governance can't change anything. You can't pause anything. That's the downside of permissionless contracts, is that once they're out there permanently. And so there was this, bug economic attack discovered about a month after they were live, and they had a bug bounty. Sherlock was sponsoring their bug bounty. It was submitted through the bug bounty program, and Sherlock ended up paying they had a deductible. So Sherlock ended up paying for a decent amount of the cost of that bug bounty, not the full thing because of the deductible. But anyways, you probably saw a lot of the notifications from Anja saying, hey, please withdraw, like, please stop borrowing on the Anja protocol, and please, get your money out over time. And so anyways, to finish the, timeline, Anja told people to get out. They've been working on a new version of the Anja protocol that fixes that bug. They are currently in a Sherlock audit. They're doing Certora form of verification. I think they're doing 2 more audits before they deploy this next version of the Anja protocol.
Insane.
So, their credit to them for taking security extremely seriously. It is quite a complex protocol. And that's kind of why, 6 audits, and there were still things that needed to be resolved. So yeah, I believe they're going to do 10 audits this year. And they're going to redeploy.
This is crazy.
Late this year. Yeah.
Wow, it just shows the importance of security, and that doesn't matter how many audits you're doing through different platforms, contests, top tier companies, eventually you still have like a bug on mainnet. It's insane. And how do they have so much money to pay for all those security reviews? Like, let's say 50, 100K per each. They really need to be funded. I'm sorry for all the DeFi protocols. Like, damn, it's like an expensive business, but what can we do?
Yeah.
And it's still, you get hacked. So you really need to be funded in order to be like a decent DeFi protocol, because security is expensive, and it's going to be more expensive if you don't do security.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of protocols that it's kind of like an iceberg, where the part that you see is what they pay for audits, and that's above the surface of the water. And the part that you don't see is this massive thing that they pay for bug bounties, and that's below the surface of the water. And that just means that, a lot of audit firms are actually not doing their job, not being effective, at least. A lot of audit firms are not being effective. And we talk to protocol teams that say, yeah, we got 2 audits with these 2 auditors. And then we immediately spent twice that amount in bug bounty payouts for 3 bug bounties afterwards. And that's not good. That's really bad. And Sherlock only has the data and feels the pain for the protocols that take coverage with us. We know about all of their bug bounties. And I think it's, the rate of bug bounties, I would like to believe, is significantly lower than the average protocol. But yeah, there's definitely high costs to putting a protocol on chain, especially a complex protocol. And I also think there's kind of an unspoken thing, which hopefully we can get out there a little bit more, of different auditors are pulling their weight more than others. Like, if you look, I think I might try to do an analysis of the Anja auditors and just look at, okay, who was finding what? Did anybody miss anything? Because there were 6 audits in a row, basically. And there's some amount of data that you can probably get out of that in terms of, okay, this bug was found in the 4th audit, but it was also discoverable in the 2nd and 3rd audit. Maybe they made an update after the 1st audit, so it wasn't discoverable in the 1st audit, but it was discoverable in the 2nd and 3rd, because, we want to make sure that all auditors are kind of pulling their weight and being as effective as they possibly can.
Yeah, this is going to be very useful for protocols, so they can avoid, in the good part, bug bounty payment, but in the worst case scenario, it will be a real black hat hack, and this will be even worse for everyone. Yeah, so talking about unique things that Sherlock came up with, such as lead senior Watsons and coverage and how it's being blended together, you also came up with judging contests, which is a very interesting concept. So can you explain, in short version, what are judging contests, why you created them, and what's the main objective behind them?
Judging contests, yeah, that's something we haven't really talked about much. It's the reason. So where do I even start on judging? Judging is probably one of the hardest problems. It is one of the hardest problems with audit contests. It is very hard. In order to, let me think about where to even start on this. The perfect judge has 3 attributes. They are extremely skilled at smart contract security, right? Because it's very difficult to know if a bug is real or not if you don't have the skills to understand the bug, understand the exploit, understand the trade-offs. So the perfect judge has to be extremely skilled at security. They have to have very deep knowledge on the code base. You can be great at smart contract security, but if you don't know how Ajna works and what it's trying to do and what the intentions of the protocol are, then it's very difficult to know if some bugs are real or not. And then the third thing is they have to be ideally perfectly unbiased. So they are not making money based on a judgment. Their friends aren't making money based on a judgment. They're basically living on Mars making these judgments, and everyone else is on Earth. And so those three things are what the perfect judge, the attributes of the perfect judge. No judge has these three attributes maxed out to 100. It's very difficult, and it's impossible to prove that certain judges are totally unbiased, because you just never know if their friend is competing and giving them kickbacks or whatever. So the judging is a really hard problem for this reason, because you can never get to like 100% maxed out on the attributes you need. And so the way Sherlock approached judging was, okay, let's try to, we didn't want a single point of failure in judging, or at least you wanted to minimize that as much as possible. And if we were to, let's say, take, a very smart guy and say, hey man, you're the judge in this contest, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with that, at least in our view, especially because the way Sherlock works is, it's fully Sybil resistant. It doesn't really know who is behind which account all the time. So Roguereddwarf, we didn't know it was HollaDieWaldfee, or however you pronounce that. And so there's some assumptions that just make having a single judge not seem to be attractive or not make sense to Sherlock. And so that's why we decided, okay, in order to, get the most unbiased judging possible, we need to create a system or a mechanism that kind of gets information from multiple different sources and uses it in a way that hopefully removes a lot of the bias from that information. If you think about Twitter or X's community notes, it's kind of a similar problem. It's different in very important ways, but it's similar in that you have people who have biases, but you're able to extract hopefully some signal if you get a large enough group of them acting productively, I guess. And in the same way, the Sherlock judging contest is, okay, let's get a lot of judges, and they will be biased. A lot of them have participated in the contest. And if they've participated in the contest, that gives them super high stats on having context on the code base, which is really important and hard to find in a judge you just pull off the street. But they're extremely biased if they participated in the contest, and certain judgments will either cause them to make money or lose money. So that's why we decided to create this system where, okay, we're going to have a ton of people who have great context on the code base, but they're super biased. So we need to find a way to create a system that removes the biases and outputs, signal instead of noise. And so that's the intention of the Sherlock judging contest. It's also because we didn't know which judges were good. We didn't know who was going to be good at judging or not. And so we wanted to have a contest system so that eventually the top judges would rise to the surface. And then we would know, okay, these are the guys that we can lean on a little bit more if there are problems or unresolved matters after the judging contest. And if you're familiar with Sherlock, there have historically always been unresolved matters after the judging contest, and that goes into the escalation period, which Sherlock also, kind of invented, which is basically like a double checking where anybody who participated in the contest can come back and say, hey, I think you actually judged this incorrectly. I want you to take another look at it, which again, Sherlock did that because anytime you have a false negative where you're basically saying, here's a real vulnerability, we're judging it as invalid, that vulnerability doesn't get shown to the protocol team. That becomes a huge liability for Sherlock and for the protocol team, because now there's a known vulnerability out there that the protocol team wasn't informed about in their curated issues, and they didn't make a fix for. And so obviously if they don't make a fix for it, they put their protocol on mainnet. Whoever submitted that issue knows about this issue, knows about this vulnerability. that can cause
can exploit
it. Exactly, or can tell it to their friend, or it gets out,
or can be dismotivated also and not participate anymore in Sherlock. Also in bad scenario.
That's another big one, which gets to the point of judging is really two things. The first one is telling the protocol team about the relevant issues they need to fix or they need to be aware of, and the second one is accurately paying participants for their work in the contest. So if you go into a contest and the judging is really terrible, you're not going to get paid based on the value you actually created in that contest, the vulnerabilities that you submitted. You'll get paid based on, randomness or whatever. So the point of judging is really those two things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there is also lead judge. So how do you become a lead judge? You need to really get a lot of successful judging contests.
Yeah, exactly. So right now, the lead judge is somebody who is the highest ranked on the judging leaderboard in terms of they've competed.
He's a student of the course, by the way. 0x Navy, great guy.
Oh yeah,
this one.
Yeah, awesome. He's been a great judge and is very up and coming in the judging world. I think he's pretty focused on judging in terms of how he spends his
judging,
time. Yeah. So that's awesome. And that's kind of what we were hoping to see in terms of let's find not just the best security experts, but let's find the best judges, the people who are able to or are excited about spending their time judging issues, going through the different submissions. And so, yes, the lead judge is basically selected in the most unbiased way possible, hopefully, because they're just the top ranked person on the judging leaderboard. They earned their spot there by doing well on previous judging contests relative to others. And the lead judge is a role that is important because at the end of the day, you do need somebody who can work with the protocol team to understand some of these trickier issues, to understand, okay, their intention was X, this issue is talking about Y, and do that last mile of really, you need some human touch at some point to talk to the protocol team and say, hey, this is why we believe this issue is valid and we judged it as valid. This is why this issue is invalid. And understand, okay, this judge in the contest was under this assumption based on the contest description, but it sounds like the contest description didn't quite describe the functionality, optimally. And so we're going to deal with that. So that's why the lead judge is there. And they're also there they're actually not there to help resolve the escalations. For right now, we have a Sherlock judge who is kind of the final unbiased participant who helps resolve the escalations alongside the lead judge. Because the only way to max out the unbiased stat in our view was to have somebody who is working at Sherlock and not competing, or at least, a core contributor to Sherlock and isn't competing heavily in contests, and kind of their reputation is based more on, or I guess their pay or their salary or whatever is based more on how well they do in their role at Sherlock rather than by doing well in an audit contest or by doing well in a judging contest and making money through those. So the system is a little bit complex, and we're making some changes to it actively in terms of, okay, we have a lead judge and a Sherlock judge and the escalation period. But right now, we think it's fairly effective in getting the raw issues, getting them to a state where we can show them to the protocol team, getting them to a state where the lead judge is comfortable with them. The lead judge can see everyone else's submissions after the judging contest ends, so they can decide, oh, I think I actually got this one wrong. They're incentivized to change it before the escalation period occurs. If the escalation period overturns one of their issues, they get penalized more than if they change it ahead of time. So there's a bunch of different kind of mechanisms in there. But at the end of the day, you get to the escalation period and then everyone else can come in and they have to put some amount of skin in the game because they have an escalation ratio, which means they can't submit escalations if they've been wrong about escalations too much in the past. We look at those escalations. The lead judge and Sherlock judge work to try to figure out, which of the escalations are real and the issue should be overturned. The judgment should be overturned, which ones aren't. And hopefully at the end of that whole process, we get to something that the protocol team and Sherlock feel fairly comfortable about in terms of the issues that need to be fixed so that the protocol team can go to mainnet.
Wow. So I always thought that auditing contest is like a complex business, but now when you now explain all the things like how to incentivize Lindsay or Watsons to participate and to give their best, and the judging, every like section is like a Pandora box of like complexities. Judging is a complexity of its own. Lindsay Watsons, the protocols, it's very impressive and very interesting. So thank you for like shedding lights on the judging area. And also, sorry, go ahead. So judging, it's also an opportunity for newcomers like this 0x Navi, which is a student in the course, and he just laser focused judging, and he really found his niche. Like maybe he's like, it's a bit harder for him to find those unique bugs, mediums, and highs, which are usually getting paid more and give you more points. But he found out that he's good and he likes like doing judging, and he really conquered the judging leaderboard, which brings him both payouts and also recognition, both in social media, in Twitter, on the leaderboard, in judging leaderboard, and also this advantage of being like a lead judge and getting those fixed payouts, which is cool. So everyone finds his own niche.
Yeah, no, I think that's really awesome. And we definitely want that to become a bigger, I guess, industry or a bigger place that people can feel comfortable focusing on and know that they'll earn some money doing it. I think the judging compensation and whatnot has been adjusted a little bit here and there. It probably still needs to be adjusted a bit more. But yeah, the idea is that we can find people, diamonds in the rough, like 0x Nevi, who maybe aren't the top lead senior Watsons where you have to pay them, $5,000 just to show up for a day. But they are very good at judging and can specialize in that role. And do a very good job there without being, a top world leading security expert, I guess.
Now, talking about all the complexities in Sherlock, obviously there need to be like people that work full time for Sherlock, right? So how many people are currently in the team?
Yeah. So I guess the core contributors of Sherlock, there's about 7 right now. So it's fairly small.
Wow, that's very small.
Yeah.
Very small, like 7 full-time workers. And I guess like sometimes you do outsource some tasks.
Yeah, there are definitely some people that we work with part-time in different areas of Sherlock who are also pretty integral to making Sherlock work well.
Very unique and small like company. It's very interesting. And do you guys work from a certain place, or it's like more like of a remote work style?
Yeah, fully remote, fully kind of crypto native remote work. We've had people from either full-time or part-time on, I think, every continent except for Antarctica. Maybe we're missing Australia actually. But yeah, so people are working from all different parts of the world. And we try to make it work that way. In terms of, remote work versus in-person work, that's a whole debate. And I think there's definitely benefits to in-person work. And Sherlock tries to get a lot of those core contributors together 2 or 3 times a year for, 2 weeks or so, just to hang out, work in person, build relationships. But yeah, most of the time you're able to work from wherever you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is like, I think, the nature of most Web3 companies. And obviously since COVID, it's got even better, more remote work friendly, until Elon Musk came to X, Twitter, and said no more for remote.
Yeah, there's definitely some very smart and, competent people who only do the in-person work and only believe in that. And, I think there's costs and benefits to both. For Elon specifically, a lot of his companies, they can't hire people outside of the US. So if everyone's in the US, it's pretty easy to make people show up in a certain state, move to a certain city. But for crypto, like, you really have to draw on talent from all over the world, and getting all those people to live in the same city is probably near impossible.
Makes sense. And did you ever have said no to clients, either if they wanted like a coverage or like an audit? Did it happen to you in the past?
Yeah. So, Sherlock we try to be very equitable in every way. But especially, there's the outcomes of audit contests are not equitable, but the beginning and the opportunity is equitable at the beginning of every audit contest. So in terms of protocol teams, we try to make it so that any protocol team, it doesn't matter if we've never heard of them, it doesn't matter, what kind of protocol they're building, they should be able to go through the entire Sherlock process and get the coverage and do everything just like any other protocol. So, we don't want to be gatekeepers. We don't want to have whitelists or biases in that sense. But there are protocols that are just so, maybe they still need to kind of go back and do a more full rewrite of their code, or maybe there's just certain problems that it doesn't make sense for them to get coverage. And so Sherlock has tried to create a lot of different quantitative thresholds to make sure that the right protocols are getting through to the right stage. So, do we turn down protocols for audits? The answer is yes. And that's because we have a fairly stringent set of requirements to do an audit with Sherlock. You have to have 80% coverage on your test suite. You have to have, a certain amount of commenting in your code base, inline commenting, and these different things where, some protocol teams just aren't ready for that or that kind of thing. And Sherlock very much tries to be the final exam audit before mainnet. So we're not trying to be that consultant audit that kind of says, hey, I'm working with you earlier on and, I only found 2 criticals, but I can tell that the way you've architected this part of the code base is going to result in a lot of headaches for you down the road. It's going to result in a lot of potential vulnerabilities if you want to make upgrades or whatever it is. That's really awesome. That's like security consulting. And I think a lot of more traditional audit firms are really good at that and really kind of
Not only traditional audit firms. It's very interesting that you said it because I'm currently looking at a protocol in another, I won't mention the name, auditing platform. And the code base is one of the worst that I've ever seen. No test coverage. There are no comments on the functions. The whole logic is all over the place, like I don't know, like 20 mappings for the same data structure. And instead of huge functions, like one of the worst, like solidity smart contracts you've ever seen. And this would never go through the filter gate to audit in Sherlock, I believe.
I hope not. That's the goal. And obviously that requires Sherlock to turn down business. It requires Sherlock to turn down, payment that individual auditors could make. So it's always difficult to do that. But at the end of the day, it honestly creates so much headache for the judging participants, for Sherlock's operational team, to take on a protocol that is really, has a lot of vulnerabilities and the code is messy, that it is fairly easy for us in certain cases to just say this is not, this is going to be bad for the protocol team because they're not going to get what they need out of this, which is like a safe code base. They're going to get 50 vulnerabilities, and it's going to be bad for the participants because they're just going to be writing up issues for 2 weeks straight and not really contributing as much value as they could have been contributing. And then it's bad for Sherlock because we have to deal with this massive operational task of, having 1,000 issues or 2,000 issues or 4,000 issues. Not to say that certain protocols that have had 1,000 issues are bad. There's definitely spam that occurs in Sherlock as well, and GPT-4 issues. So I don't blame any protocol if they have a high number of issues. It could definitely be because the Sherlock has had more, spam submissions in that contest. But to your point, yes, hopefully those protocols are not being audited at Sherlock.
Which also emphasizes the importance of developers who know smart contract security and good code practices, because not only their code is awful, also auditing firms and auditing platforms are going to reject them because, you really need to do you cannot just throw all the responsibility in a third party. You need to I don't know, at least write a good code.
Yeah. And Avert and I were in that situation 2.5-3 years ago when we were writing the first version of the Sherlock smart contracts. We didn't know a lot about, he knew a lot about security, but we weren't actively thinking about, okay, what were the bugs that, who was it, like Pickle Finance or whatever just had, or, we weren't up to speed on the latest. And it took us, a certain number of months to build the protocol. And by the time we got to the first
to refactor.
Yeah, by the time we got to the first audit, it was like, oh, whoa, we should have been thinking about this from like an adversarial mindset in this way and that way that we just had no idea about until we get to the first audit. And if you're getting to that, like if you're doing Sherlock as your first audit and you're learning about that for the first time as you're getting into a Sherlock audit, that's going to be a painful experience.
Not going to make it.
Yeah.
Not going to make it. It's very interesting. Yeah. And recently also there is like more competition in the space. It seems like everywhere, like in every space that is evolving, which is good, in all parts of sections and niches. If it's like auditing contest platforms, bug bounty platforms, educators in the space and courses. And what do you think about this competition? Like, is it good for the industry? Is it bad for the industry? How does it change Sherlock?
Yeah. I agree. There's a lot of competition. The security space is acting a little bit weird right now compared to a lot of other spaces in crypto, where there are some more aggressive, marketing efforts. There's money being spent. Like, we're pretty deep into what a lot of people are calling a bear market right now, and a lot of different protocol industries that we talk to or that we're looking at. There's not a lot going on. It's mostly bad things and protocols kind of teams getting out of the, what they were working on, unfortunately. But in the security space, it's almost the opposite in some ways, where we've seen new entrants to the space. We've seen people spending a lot of money, subsidizing different aspects of things, and generally being quite aggressive. So,
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's also a natural thing to happen in a bear market, because there's more scarcity in a bear market. So people who are doing different things that weren't working as well for them, they start all competing for a smaller set of customers, or competing in different areas where the pie is only so big. So I think it's very natural to see a lot of competitors kind of jump in, especially when times are tougher and money and customers are more scarce. So yeah, I think that's like, it's natural to see more competition in some ways because of that. And from Sherlock's perspective, I'm not really sure how we think about it. It hasn't really affected us in a lot of ways, I would say. Like, there are more competitors, but I don't see them being super active in some respects. So it hasn't really been something that is a huge issue, but it's definitely, something that we have to be aware of, because eventually if there's enough competitors that are spending enough energy in different areas and, being aggressive, then that can cause problems and be something that Sherlock will have to react to. And I'm sure, you said it's also happening in the education space for Web3 security and whatnot. So, I'm sure you're dealing with this in certain ways as well.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's like natural, but it's very interesting, like the contrast that you said between like the whole like crypto DeFi bear market, and that security is like flourishing, which is actually a good thing, because hopefully the next cycle there will be less hacks and less, because we are already like building and preparing, and this is very interesting. So would you recommend newcomers, entrepreneurs, or people that want to pursue Web3 security career to enter this market right now?
I mean, you should enter the market if you're interested in it. If you have curiosity, and curiosity kind of is the precursor to passion.
That's what I always say.
Yeah, like you shouldn't enter it because it happens to be in a bear market or bull market, or have certain amount of contests running a certain week or pay available in a certain week. That's not going to end well. Just like you shouldn't start a crypto company because it's a bull market, or because, a certain space is hot. By the time, like for a security expert, by the time you've learned what you need to know about security, the dynamics of the space could be very different. And that's the same with Sherlock. We were started, the early inklings of Sherlock it was a bear market. And then there was a bull market in between, and now it's kind of a bear market. So like, if you're getting into any area because of the current market dynamics, it doesn't seem like the right reason to be entering that area, because those market dynamics are going to change, and it's going to take you a long time, years, to become a great security expert.
To adjust.
Yeah. So you're going to experience different market dynamics across those years. So you should be in it for a different reason than the current market dynamic, hopefully.
Indeed. And for beginners like that want to start with Sherlock, what would you recommend them to do? Apart from learning and studying, like, should they start with auditing, with judging contest, or with audit contest? Should they compete for points, for not for points? Like, how should they study, and how to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm probably not the perfect person to answer it. I've done Ethernaut, I've done a lot of things in the smart contract security space, but I would not consider myself an expert on, I would not be top 50 on Sherlock's leaderboard. Well, we'll put it that way. So I'm probably not the right person to answer that, but I would say that a lot of again, if you're going into it for curiosity, if you're going into it because you think you could become passionate about it, then you're going to be in it for a long time, and it makes sense to spend a lot of time learning the fundamentals. So I would still recommend reading Mastering Ethereum. I think it's amazing. A lot of the code exercises don't work anymore, and you have to submit, issues on in the GitHub to help make them work. But doing the fundamentals, going through, your courses and other courses that are really starting with a lot of the basics, that is something that you're never going to regret if you plan to spend a significant amount of time in the space. And I think there are some security experts who maybe see the shiny object of a contest. They see the shiny object of doing, I don't know what it is, solo audits, working at an audit firm. And it would, if they're planning to spend a lot of time in this space, they can never go wrong by spending too much time or spending enough time on the fundamentals.
For sure, 100% agree. So it's very lucrative industry and a lot of opportunities, but you cannot come for 1 week or 1 month and expect to make 100K a month, or be the top lead senior Watson. It takes time, like every other thing, and it won't work without passion and curiosity. That's what I always say. You really need to like it and not come for a short term, for the money pot, or for barrel pool market. So I definitely agree with you. So what's on the roadmap of Sherlock? Are you guys working on something new, something exciting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, what can I say about our roadmap? It's very much, doubling down on what we're currently doing, focusing on making it better. A lot of aspects of crypto are still not to the place they need to be, and security is one of them. And like we just talked about, audit contests have so many pieces to them if you're trying to do them right and you're trying to deliver a good experience, that Sherlock plans to spend a lot of time continuing to make the audit contest product better. And I think there are, some adjacent products that make sense, adjacent offerings that make sense as well. And those will come in due time. But for now, Sherlock is really focused on, okay, we want to be the final exam audit before you go to mainnet. We want to have skin in the game in some respect and cover you once you are on mainnet, and really be kind of your friend or your ally in that process, instead of somebody who it's just a very, short-term interaction, transactional interaction. So yeah, Sherlock is going to be very focused on continuing to make its current product set better, and make sure that a protocol team can come into a Sherlock audit with, a few things done, like the test suite and whatnot, and come out the other side of it fully covered on mainnet and confident about, their code base and their prospects, hopefully on mainnet. So that's really what we're working in service of.
It's very interesting. And also I see that you deliver very fast and ship new features very fast, like the milestones, the profiles, like all the Web3 startups are working very fast, especially you and in the security space, which is very cool to see.
Yeah, huge credit to our developers. They work super hard and they're super passionate about what we're doing. And they love to see, all of the people who benefit or are able to make a name for themselves on Sherlock or able to pay their rent because of Sherlock and these different things. It's really awesome to see that. And so I know for myself, that inspires me to do a better job and create a better experience. And that inspires our developers and the rest of our team as well.
And now for the last $1 million question, how do we get better as an industry? Like, how do we avoid all these hacks? Like, what do you think we need to do in order to take the security and the mass adoption to the next level? What's missing?
Yeah, I mean, we think about this question a lot at Sherlock, and the answers are they're not fun. I think a big one is having skin in the game and having incentive alignment. And that's something Sherlock has been working on even before we got into auditing and will continue to work on, because I think if there's any reason why Sherlock became good at auditing, we didn't plan on getting into auditing when we first started Sherlock. And the only reason we've gotten good at it is because we approached it with a incentive aligned mindset, basically, of if we keep the protocol safe on mainnet, then our coverage business works better, then, Sherlock becomes more successful. And that's very aligned with, okay, users can now put their life savings into crypto and feel better about it. Protocols can now attract more users and make more money. Trying to, align incentives in that way has been very important for Sherlock forever. So I think hopefully we'll see more efforts in that direction. I would love to see audit firms having some skin in the game, having some kind of warranty or whatever, where if they miss a vulnerability, then something bad should happen. A bad thing happens to the protocol team. So if you want to align your incentives, then something bad has to happen to you as well. And I don't think we see that still in the auditing space. And Sherlock has really been trying to push very hard on that to get people to align incentives a bit more. So that's a big one, is just security teams, security projects need to align their incentives with their customers more. And the other one, I think, is that this one is not popular, but there are still a lot of audit firms out there, not audit firms. There are a lot of less than high quality audits happening in the space still. And it can come from a bunch of different areas. So figuring out ways to have more quantitative metrics around what a successful audit looked like versus an unsuccessful audit. Did this audit firm, get a 95% score on this audit, or did they get a 55% score? Because I think right now there are still audits being done that get 55% scores, and we don't know. No one knows about it. Protocol team doesn't know about it. No one hears about it. And ideally, the space moves in a direction where it's easier to figure out who's swimming without clothes on and doing audits that maybe aren't of the highest quality, and who is really doing those high quality audits. So I think there's more the space can do to flesh that out.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's very important. There are a lot of things that need to be improved in the auditing section. But I truly believe that there are a lot of other areas that are currently not being covered at all, or very immature compared to traditional cybersecurity. And if we also improve these areas, the whole security will be improved, such as monitoring, IR, education for developers, so they can come more prepared and design their code in more adversarial, attacker mindset. But we have a long way to go, for sure.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I would love every protocol to have monitoring. I think one of the reasons monitoring hasn't taken off yet is just because it's an extra cost, and it's something that can't guarantee you can't guarantee that it can prevent any exploit. As long as there are flash zones in the space and there's flash bots, and an exploit can basically be fully accomplished in one block, monitoring and incident response is going to have difficulty preventing those kind of things. But I do think that monitoring significantly increases the difficulty of hacks for black hat hackers. And that is really important, because if you can say, okay, this black hat guy who thinks they have a 80% probability of executing this $1 million exploit, so 800K payout, that's great. It probably makes sense for them to do that, considering whatever legal trade-offs they're making. But now if it's like, oh shoot, these guys have monitoring, now I need to restructure my exploit to happen in one block. If I don't get it right, then I'm basically, I've outed myself. And so I can't do it again. And like, okay, now I'm going to be taking this legal risk without actually stealing the money that I'm trying to steal. So yeah, I think, even if monitoring can't prevent the perfect exploit that happens in one block, it significantly increases the difficulty. You have to basically deploy your attack contract in the same block that you execute the attack. All these different things, because otherwise the monitoring could potentially pick up that you deployed a exploit contract or an attack contract. All those things will, like you said, make it more difficult for attackers, for black hats, and make security as a whole a lot stronger. It will make audit firms look better, because those exploits won't happen. They'll get prevented ahead of time, hopefully, or prevented when the attacker makes any kind of mistake. So totally agree that all these different things contribute to making the space more secure.
For sure. And this is something that I discussed in a previous podcast with Peter from Unit 0x team in Coinbase. And we are very behind traditional cybersecurity, because auditing is kind of like penetration testing. And this is just a small part in cybersecurity. So for example, regarding monitoring, on one point you can DDoS the attacker and eventually maybe find him and put him to court and get back the money somehow. But on the other way, we see that in many cases, the attack, there is some kind of a time threshold where the attack taking place, and let's say 2 or 3 minutes, where like, okay, laundering money or funding the wallet, or maybe deploying some contracts before, or doing some test transactions to the contracts. And if you can monitor and find these kind of things, maybe you can somehow prevent it. So you can do monitoring for DDoS, like post exploitation, finding the attacker, or monitoring for prevention. And on top of that, you have all these generalized front runners that find profitable transaction. It could be a sandwich attack transaction or a hack transaction, and then they front run the original attacker to take the money. Yep. Now, most of them are black hats, but if there is a company that can do that and become white hat, like what Blockstack did, and saved some funds from protocols and then pay back the money, maybe keep some kind of service fee or something, that could be a very interesting startup that will be a good business and also improve the industry in terms of security. Because if you can create the best generalized front runner, the fastest, the smartest, then you can save a lot of money from hackers that are not prepared, that there will be a bot that replicate their attack and be faster than them. So it's very interesting.
It's super interesting. I know we might be running out of time, but that whole aspect is super cool, because I think even if you have a generalized front runner that's a good guy and one that's a bad guy, the bad guy has to pay Flashbots or whoever, an amount so that they still keep a lot of money for themselves. The good guy can actually pay the entire amount to Flashbots and say, hey, we spent 800K, making sure that our transaction happened first, but we made 800K from the attack. And now we ask, Flashbots to give us the 800K that we paid in order to save those funds. There are hopefully there are some advantages, hopefully, that the good guy would have. Obviously, that's a little bit crazy, because you have to spend 800K and hope that you recover it and get the attack right. But there are, in theory, some advantages that a good guy front runner would have.
Very interesting direction, and a very good startup idea for Web3 security for entrepreneurs that are coming into the space. Because I think if you do it well, you can be a big company in the space that contributes to the space and also making a good business. So just some startup idea that Peter and I shared in a previous podcast. Yeah, definitely. And we also always say in traditional cybersecurity, I remember my commander in the military used to tell me, doing cyber defense is not about preventing 100% of attacks. You can always get attacked. The idea and the goal is to make the attack more harder and more expensive, so the attacker will choose a different target, because this one is going to be too complicated and too expensive in terms of resources. So I think it's the same for every, like I take this sentence with me, and nothing is immune, everything can be hacked, but your goal is to make the attacker life harder.
Yeah, 100%. If you make their life harder, that makes everything easier for the good guys.
All right, Jake, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with the audience. I'm sure people enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. It was a super fun conversation, and appreciate you hitting on a bunch of different topics. So yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone who listened, and really appreciate you having me on.